Let's move on to, oh yeah, war. We're not ready for it, evidently. A year-long review by the Commons Defence Committee found that the government will never achieve war fighting or strategic readiness without urgent reforms to reverse a recruitment crisis and dramatically boost Britain's stockpile of weapons and ammunition. Joining me now to explain what on earth is going on here is former head of counter-terrorism, MOD Major General Chip Chapman. Chip, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. I'm sorry, this report, which has been a year in the making, is terrifying. We don't actually appear to have armed forces that are anywhere near good for the job. What's going on?
It is pretty terrifying, but you've got to really ask yourself 4 questions and answer those to see how bad it is. The first one is when. When do we see Russia, if that's the persistent threat, being, going to war with them? A couple of weeks ago, we had Admiral Rod Bauer from NATO saying, don't assume we'll be at peace for the next 20 years. This report from the Telegraph said it gives you 3 years. Where would presumably be in Eastern Europe, the Baltics, could be Poland, but that assumes, of course, that Russia are successful in Ukraine, and no one really expects that to be over until at least 2025. The why would be that politics is really broken down between NATO and Russia, and of course an attack on one is an attack on all. But the key thing which this really shows us is the with what, and the with what is in serious disorder, really. So it's really probably worse from the army's perspective in terms of the outflow of the military is greater than the inflow. And that means you lose a lot of specializations as you go up the sort of chain of command. It's also pretty bad in the Navy, of course, because the carrier, part of the reason the carrier has caveats on its deployment, if it were to deploy to the Gulf of Aden, for example, is there are no Royal Fleet auxiliary vessels available, which means that it can't be sustained at sea. It would have to go away from the operational area into port visits. So we can do the task that we are allocated at the moment within the NATO framework, but our fight tonight capability across most of the services is pretty diminished.
Why, Chip, is there this problem? The MOD say that only 5 personnel are recruited for every 8 that leave. And recruitment levels, as you said, is falling across all the forces. Infantry Training Centre in Catterick has worst levels of recruitment in 5 years. And this is, I mean, you know, the last recruitment poster I remember was this diversity drive where they, you know, ticking all the right boxes. But no one's joining up. Why are we not joining up anymore?
Well, I think there's a number of factors. Firstly, you know, Generation Z are different than the former generations. And if we look back to the September 23 YouGov polls, for example, when the first notions of national service came in, only 10% of that cohort said that they would accept national service, and 78% were opposed. Now, 10% is 10% of 749,000. So if the country really were at war with Russia, and you extrapolated 75,000 for each age group from 18 onwards, that would still give you a coherent force of which you could regenerate the force. But of course, there's other things. The offer is not deemed to be as good. That is, the pay is not deemed to be good, and people have been in the last few years supporting the government in military aid to the civil authority task, you know, during the COVID period, and are seeing their sort of peers in other public services potentially getting more than them. The accommodation always appears in the press as being deficient, and all those things play into the public perspective of the armed forces being slightly broken. I have to say the counter to that is it's still, you know, exciting, full of opportunity, and we have this paradox when you're campaigning in places like Afghanistan, people sign up because a lot of people actually like the kind of adventure of war, which is, you know, terrible, and they don't necessarily know that. But people do sign up when there's that real threat to you. And if there is this threat, intent and opportunity from Russia, and I think people would sign up, they just don't see it because we're geographically separated by 1,700 miles from Moscow.
Chip, we're running out of time, unfortunately. I could talk to you for all day on this one. Just very, very quickly, which situation worries you more, the situation in the Middle East or the situation with Russia at the moment?
Neither, in terms of, I don't think World War III is coming up either of those. I see the Middle East as a persistent twilight war, which is exacerbated by Israel and Gaza. One of the notions on Russia is you never open a second front, and they would have to wrap up in a significant strategic victory, Ukraine, before they would be in a position to threaten NATO. So neither of them is an imminent threat at the moment. Neither do I see World War III from both of those theatres.
Thank you. And this is why I could talk to you all afternoon. Very reassuring. Chip, thank you very much. That's Major General Chip Chapman there.